On WhatsApp, no one can see or hear your personal messages. Whether it's a voice call, message, or sending a password. To WhatsApp, it's all just this. So whether you're sharing the streaming password in the family chat or trading those late-night voice messages that could basically become a podcast, your personal messages stay between you, your friends, and your family. No one else. Not even us. WhatsApp. Message privately with everyone.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive, a leader in boat insurance. Welcome aboard to Carefree Boating. Here, we don't worry about the what-ifs, because we explore with Progressive Boat Insurance for as little as $100 per year for a basic liability policy. Progressive also offers a variety of other coverages and can help you cover repair costs when you need it. And with discounts like multi-policy, safety courses, responsible driver, and more, your mind can really float free. Cruise on over to Progressive.com to get a quote today and see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Rate and discounts not available in all states or situations.
Pie in the Sky Media. This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence throughout. Listener discretion is advised. Home. It's the place you go to for stability and comfort. It's here that we plant roots, and the walls that surround and protect us also become the silent witnesses to our lives, our joy and pain, heartache and love, and if we're very lucky, peace and happiness. This is exactly what newlyweds Shanti and David were hoping to build, in the form of a historic Victorian home on Copeland Drive in the Tony Delaney Park neighborhood. When David purchased the home in 2015, the bones were there. When they took down that for sale sign, it was move-in ready, but they wanted to make it their own, and they had big dreams. A remodel that would modernize the 4,000 square foot space into a more open concept. But you know the saying, the best laid plans of mice and men. So how did a beloved, historic home end up 3 years later as a candidate for an episode in the reality TV home renovation show Zombie House Flipping, whose premise is to take on the worst of the worst homes and restore them.
What are we doing at this house?
This thing was belched out of the Earth's innards.
Oh my God, what is this? The zombie house. Together.
And who could have predicted that it wasn't just a zombie house that needed to be saved?
Non-emergency assistance calls reported. Hello?
My she's not breathing. I'm trying to do CPR. I can't.
Okay, listen to me.
I need help.
Welcome back to Criminal Mischief with Carolyn and Brandon. You're listening to episode 89, The Perfect House. It was nearly 4 in the afternoon of April 24th, 2018, when David Tronis frantically calls 911. You just heard him. He's almost unintelligible, and yet he's able to make it abundantly clear that his wife needs immediate assistance. First responders race to the scene, believing that a woman has been found by her husband in a bathtub of water and she's not breathing. The call was coded as a 59, which means they're being dispatched to a sick or injured person. There's a potential to save a life, if they can get to her in time. Officers arrive at the home on Copeland Drive within minutes. They find 49-year-old David Tronis sobbing, utterly inconsolable, as he brings first responders to his wife, Shanti. She's lying on the floor in their upstairs garage apartment. It's obvious that 39-year-old Shanti Cooper Tronis is dead. It's also clear that she's suffered blunt force trauma to the head, and that the wound is not consistent with falling in the shower. Shanti would be pronounced dead at the scene, and right away, the responding officers call the homicide unit. This isn't an accidental death. This is now a murder investigation. Delaney Park is not a place where homicides occur. It's a coveted neighborhood about 30 minutes away from Disney, but a world away from crowds and a carny atmosphere. It's the kind of place you want to drive around and appreciate the beauty of a well-appointed neighborhood. These are not cookie-cutter homes smushed together. Each home in this area is unique and has a sense of character. Large lots, wide sidewalks with huge, mature oak trees. The perfect accent to manicured lawns. The two homicide detectives arrive at Copeland Drive at around 4:48 p.m. Not even an hour has passed since David's frantic 911 call. They park in front of this century-old Victorian home, which on the outside looks par for the course in this neighborhood. The investigators don't go inside the main house, but are directed down the long driveway, past the pool, into the garage, and up the stairs to a loft apartment. On-scene detective Teresa Sprague.
I noticed quite a few things about the decedent, Miss Shanti Cooper-Tronis. The first thing I noticed was that she appeared to be in rigor mortis. Her right arm was up at the elbow, unsupported. Her knees were raised up, unsupported. I noticed a significant amount of swelling to her face. Eyes were black and blue, lips were black and blue. Her left eye was swollen shut. Significant trauma to her eyes. I noticed a significant, what appeared to be either a puncture wound or a laceration that was bleeding under her chin, on her cheek, on her left cheek. She had significant abrasions to the tops of her knees that appeared to be some sort of rug burn or carpet burns. She had on her right wrist some sort of scratch or dig that was deep that appeared to be also some sort of rug burn or some sort of scrape. She had bruising on her right shoulder, on her legs, on her arms, bruising around her neck, and then what appeared to be abrasions on her neck. So I was shocked at the brutality of it, but there was no question in my mind she'd been beaten and strangled.
David, the victim's husband, he found her in the shower, and they need to know what happened. So they ask if he will come down to the station to give a statement. Standard procedure in any homicide investigation. He agrees, doesn't ask for an attorney, and as he waits for detectives to come back to the station to interview him, officers collect his clothes and photos are taken. By this time, just looking at Shanti, it's clear from her injuries that she's been brutally attacked. However, once David is stripped down, there's no physical evidence connecting him to Shanti's injuries. He doesn't have blood on his clothing, no scratch or claw marks from a physical altercation. It's around 10 o'clock when detectives Teresa Sprague and Barb Sharp finally sit down with David, and they get a little background on the couple. How they met in 2013 on Match.com. At the time, they were both recently divorced. Shanti had a 3-year-old son, Jackson, from her previous marriage. When they first began exchanging messages, David was living in Minnesota. He was a successful engineer, and he received a sizable inheritance from his father, so he was able to retire as a multimillionaire. Shanti was hardworking. She ran her own successful financial software business out of her home office. And she was a dedicated mother to her son, who she shared custody with her ex-husband, Jim. It wasn't long before Shanti and David's messages would ramp up into a fiery email love affair. Investigators would find a document on Shanti's computer. She wrote, quote, "Dave, I will have to say, I think this will be a delicious detour. Amazing, magnificent, life-changing detour. I have had a pep in my step since we started this little email affair." And during David's interview with police, he would say they had a deep and soulful connection, that these fantastic emails would lead to flights. She would visit him in Minnesota, and he would travel to be with her in Florida. Within months, David would actually move to Florida to be with Shanti. And in April of 2015, he would purchase the home in Delaney Park, paying a little more than $600,000 cash for it. He tells investigators that the house was perfectly livable, but that Shanti wanted a more modern, open concept, so they began to renovate right away. David would propose to Shanti with a stunning diamond ring, a prized possession that she never took off of her finger. They would marry in 2017 at a courthouse wedding. They had been together 5 years and married for 1 when Shanti is found dead. David would say that their life had been a bit stressful because Shanti had recently had an appendicitis, that she was still recovering from her surgery, which had happened a couple of months before she died. Investigators would ask David to detail his day before he found Shanti at around 3:55 p.m. And he would explain that he got up just after 7 that morning, about the same time that Shanti had gone downstairs to have a cigarette. after which she went back upstairs for some work calls. Then he said she came back down at around 9:15-ish to take a break, and that was the last time he saw her, because it was around that time that he went to go walk the dogs at a nearby park for a couple of hours. When he returned, he just started doing yard work, cleaning the pool, and it wasn't till around 3:45 that he went upstairs to the loft apartment to ask Shanti if she wanted him to go pick up her son Jackson at school. But when he got to the top of the stairs, he didn't see Shanti at her work desk. And after calling out, "Hello," the only thing he hears is the slow, steady sound of trickling water coming from the bathroom, where he finds Shanti still in her pajama top and bottom, half submerged, face down in a bathtub full of bloody water.
The water's like half full. She's submerged partially, but she's also partially not submerged, and one of her legs is kind of sticking up and out a little bit. And it's just extremely awful, and it doesn't look natural. Obviously, she fell or something happened, and I turned the water off. I tried to pick her up. She's dead.
David says that he pulls Shanti out of the tub and he tries to perform CPR. He offers up what he thinks could have possibly happened to her, that she must have slipped or fallen, blacked out, and hit her head. But the physical evidence is just not matching up with his story. If David had just pulled Shanti from the bathtub 5 minutes before he'd called 911, why wasn't he wet when the first responders arrived? Why wasn't the floor wet in the bathroom or bathtub? Why weren't there wet marks from when he had dragged her onto the mattress pad in the living room? And Shanti's injuries weren't consistent with a slip and fall in the shower. Her eyes were swollen, she had a puncture wound to her face, a gash on her ear. She had petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes, which is an indication that she'd been strangled. And her body was in rigor mortis when first responders had arrived at the scene. Rigor mortis varies, but usually begins 1 to 2 hours after death and lasts about 12 hours. The last contact anyone had with Shanti, aside from Dave's story of leaving her to go walk the dogs at around 9:15-ish, was the night before. Shanti spoke with her son over the phone at 8:30 p.m. Shanti's phone records also showed that her cell phone hadn't moved since 11:28 p.m., 3 hours after her conversation with her son the night before, which also didn't sync up with David's story. As a business owner, Shanti was always on the phone, responding to messages, taking calls, checking for emails, and she received a text related to her work at 6:58 a.m. that morning, around the time that David said she'd come down for a cigarette, just before he said she went back upstairs to take work calls. But her phone showed that she'd never opened or responded to the message. Investigators had to wonder, was Shanti already dead by 6:58 in the morning? At this point, the investigators' tone shifts. They tell him that they don't believe his story. And not only that, they accuse him of fake crying.
People can be sympathetic when they hear people be honest and remorseful. They can be empathetic to a situation that gets out of hand. But when people lie for hours on end and say, "I know nothing about nothing, I don't know how she got that way. I thought she tripped and fell. I wasn't home. I was here. I was there." Conveniently, you're not there. It's complete hogwash. You know, you fake cried for about 7 or 8 hours today. Not one tear came out of your eyes. Not one. Not one. Not on scene with the officers. Not in this room. You have fake cried over this woman's death since we made contact with you for hours. And every single time you fake cried, we wrote it down. Not one tear came out of your eyes. Not one.
When asked about the blood found on the mattress pad that Shanti had been laying on, which they believe is where she'd been killed, based on the amount of blood they found, Dave says that that blood was from Shanti's period, that they'd had sex on Saturday and Sunday night, that it had been very messy, that it got on the bedspread and on the side of the bed, and that they didn't wash the sheets until Monday, and that as a result, the blood from her period had seeped down onto the mattress topper. That night and into the early morning hours, the detectives would spend hours trying to get him to confess. If you and your wife were so in love, why were you sleeping downstairs on the couch in the garage with the dogs when Shanti was living upstairs with Jackson for the most part? He would come back saying Shanti snored, and that was why. Detectives asked him about the remodel, how it had to have been stressful for Shanti, and he would respond, "We loved what we were doing to the house, we loved the vision." Whatever they threw at him, he stuck to his story, insisting that he hadn't hurt Shanti, that they were totally in love, and at some point, as they continued to interrogate him, he dozed off.
You still have a future. You still have a life to live. You're still breathing. You're a young man. You still have the rest of your life to live. I can't tell you what's going to happen to you. I don't know because you're not telling the truth. You want me to tell your truth, or do you want to tell your truth? Because if I tell you truth, it's probably going to be first degree, premeditated. I don't think that's fair, but you're not leaving me a lot of choice.
And then what happens?
You face the music.
Which is?
You face the music. You face a jury of your peers.
I appreciate the things that you've said and the genuine consideration and thoughtfulness. I don't know what else I consider right now.
The truth. Look at Jackson, how happy he was. Now think about what you took away from her. Now what do I tell Jackson? David's a monster. Are we boring you? Look at his picture, David. How do you explain this? What are you going to tell Jackson? If you're going to sleep, I'm going to start writing. By all means, take a nap while your life's hanging in the balance.
The next morning, after 14 hours of interrogation, they let him go. They weren't done with David Tronis, but they had other suspects to look at, like Shanti's ex-husband, Jim Cooper. I remember when I first got access to the internet. Of course, I was an adult, but I still had to learn a thing or two, like maybe not the best timing to send an email to someone after having a glass of wine or two. Which is all to say, I didn't grow up with the internet the way today's kids have. I'm Gen X, baby, and I am so grateful for that. But now, having 5 kids over the years with varying access to cell phones, it's always a battle to figure out what the right age is for a kid to get a cell phone, especially if all their friends have one. Because I've learned that you can't control what they're seeing on social media, the music or videos they're looking up, sometimes stumbling into inappropriate content by accident. It's unnerving to think about how a cell phone in a kid's hand could be like opening Pandora's box. Which is why I'm excited about Gab. Gab is the leader in safe smartphones and watches for kids, teens, and tweens. With no social media apps, no internet browser, and GPS tracking. Now, this may sound boring to your kid, but it's really not. Gab phones and watches are still tech kids actually want. There's unlimited talk and text, a clean music streaming app, and over 100 third-party apps that can be installed at parents' discretion. I want to stay connected with my youngest son, who's 10 years old, but I know he's not ready for a full-on cell phone. And so Gab allows both of us to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and here's how. First of all, my son didn't think he was going to get a cell phone until he was 14. And so he was really excited to get his Gab phone in the mail. And I love making him happy and giving him a little bit more responsibility. I genuinely feel better about letting him free range, knowing he can call me at any time. Gab is a real game changer for me and my son, and I can't recommend enough that you give Gab a try. And this is the absolute best time to check them out because right now, Gab is offering $25 off any device to new customers with no contract required. That's $25 off any Gab smartphone or smartwatch. Just go to gab.com/mischief. That's where you'll get the best deal. That's Gab, GABB.com/mischief. Gab.com/mischief.
So good, so good, so good.
Ready to rack to school and save big? Get to your Nordstrom Rack store today for thousands of deals from just $20.
Because I want to look fresh.
How did I not know Rack has Adidas?
I got a new backpack.
Score everyone's favorite denim, sneakers, boots, and activewear from Nike, Levi's, Steve Madden, Madewell, and Free People. Great brands, great prices. Everyone's got a reason to rack. Shop Nordstrom Rack and make it the best school year ever.
This Friday, Jamie Lee Curtis and Lindsay Lohan are back to switch things up in Disney's Freakier Friday.
Totally, yes.
It's an absolute riot, and the only movie that can be described as
So much weirder than the last time. What last time?
it's the frequel
You ready?
we've been waiting for.
That absolutely slays. What deeply out of touch old person came up with that? You did. Wow.
Don't miss the comedy event of the summer for all ages. Disney's Freakier Friday, in theaters this Friday. Get tickets now. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
This episode is brought to you by the world's first reposado from Tequila Herradura. Made with slow-cooked, hand-harvested agave sealed into oak barrels and aged 11 months. Before being enjoyed in your glass. Experience the world's first reposado. Tequila Herradura. Please drink responsibly. Responsibility.org. Tequila Herradura. 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Brown-Forman, Louisville, Kentucky. Herradura is a registered trademark. Copyright 2025 Brown-Forman Corporation.
It's Wednesday, Adams. I see you're trying to distract yourself from your own banal thoughts. Let me help. Here's a recording thing made of my latest root canal.
Wednesday, Season 2, begins August 6th, only on Netflix.
In a police interview after Shanti's murder, he would tell investigators that his divorce with Shanti had been extremely contentious. He described that in the beginning their relationship had been amazing, but after they got married, they struggled to conceive a child, which was stressful. When they were just about to give up, Shanti found out that she was pregnant with Jackson. But the joy of a baby couldn't save their relationship. Their life together had become strained and eventually took a turn for the worse after Shanti had an affair. Even so, Jim didn't want the relationship to end, and as a result, he would tell detectives that he made it very difficult for Shanti. After this interview, detectives were taking a really hard look at Jim Cooper. As it would turn out, he had an airtight alibi. The detectives would spend days canvassing the Delaney Park neighborhood, searching for security camera footage, speaking to neighbors. Had anyone seen anything or anyone unusual in the day or days leading up to Shanti's murder? Because at the house, there was no evidence of a break-in. And the only thing missing was Shanti's $15,000 engagement ring. Since the ring was gone, investigators had to look into the possibility that Shanti was the victim of a burglary gone wrong. Even though nothing else from the loft apartment, Shanti's wallet, her watch, cell phone, her diamond earrings, nothing of value was missing other than Shanti's ring, which friends and family would say that she never took off. Meantime, David is put under surveillance. He was acting like the grieving husband in public, but within several weeks, he's trying to get access to Shanti's life insurance policy of over $350,000, as he's her beneficiary. Investigators would receive a tip from an employee at a place called Club Orlando. It's a local gym for gay men, and David Tronis had a membership. In fact, he'd been a member for 18 months, and in an interview with detectives, the Club Orlando employee would allege that he'd walked into the locker room and observed David engaged in oral sex with another member. They would also find receipts showing David had been to the club 78 times. Was this a motive for murder? Had Shanti found out about David's alleged extramarital activities? Did she threaten to leave him? In the course of their investigation, there was no evidence corroborating that Shanti was aware of these alleged affairs. But there was another potential motive coming to the surface. When investigators spoke to Shanti's 8-year-old son, who spent half of his time living with his mother and stepfather on Copeland Drive, he shared that there were a lot of arguments between the couple. Anything could start a yelling and screaming match, but mostly it was about the remodel. Remember the one that had started in 2015? David was in charge of that renovation, and by Shanti's death in 2018, it was still ongoing. In fact, the reason that she was living in the garage apartment was because the main house had become utterly uninhabitable. Shanti was living in the humble 800 square foot loft apartment upstairs where there was a full bathroom, but she'd have to go down into the garage to cook on a little hot plate, and there was a microwave. If you looked at the outside of the house, it appeared to be really nice, one of the jewels of the neighborhood. But if you went inside the main house, you would be shocked. Everything had been stripped. The flooring, the drywall, it was one big gaping space. The inside had been entirely gutted beyond the studs. In fact, the only thing holding up the house was 2 inches of stucco. All the interior dividing walls were gone in this 2-story house. And those within Shanti's inner circle were confused by the construction issues and the delays. They just didn't get what was going on. David would hire a new crew and it would be like, great, we can finally move forward. But then something would always go wrong and David would fire them. Here's Shanti's friend who had expertise in design and construction. Shanti would ask her to come over before she died to get her opinion about the remodel.
She was very frustrated by how long it was taking. I normally would do a project like this in 3 to 4 months, a full gut renovation on the houses that I've done. And she knew that. So I think for her, she said it was frustrating because she was nowhere near done. And I think the second time she asked me to come to the house, it was like a desperate plea because, she wanted my opinion on what she could do to get it done,
Another point of contention was that Shanti had dumped nearly $250,000 into this remodel, and yet her name wasn't even on the deed. When David had bought the house, he placed it in a joint trust with his mother. Even after they got married, he wouldn't add Shanti's name to the deed, despite the fact that she was funding this failed renovation. For Shanti, the house had become a complete money pit with no end in sight. A remodel that David was supposed to be taking care of because he wasn't working. But as investigators dug deeper into his life, it seemed that what he was doing was swimming, taking yoga classes, maintaining the landscaping, cleaning the pool. He certainly wasn't contributing to the household, which was something that was incredibly frustrating for Shanti. I mean, he was supposed to be a multimillionaire. Why wasn't he helping out with the household expenses or even the remodel? Investigators would find out that there was no evidence to support that David was a multimillionaire as he claimed. And if Shanti was the main breadwinner, the one paying for the renovations, her potentially leaving him, was that a motive for murder? Investigators would find that this house had become more than just a project to David Tronis. It became his obsession. According to Shanti's friend, she called crying, saying, "I'm so scared. I just need to get out. He knows I know too much, and he won't let me go." But apparently later she would call the friend again and say, "We're good, I'm just gonna stay," and try to minimize her feelings and the situation. David believed he'd found a lifeline for his epic failure when he reached out to Keith Ory, who's the host of the reality TV show Zombie House Flipping. Here's Ory describing the first time he went to view David's home as a potential candidate for the show.
I went by the house. I wasn't necessarily expecting very much, but when I walked inside, it was something I hadn't seen before. I don't think very many people get to see. We talk in terms with respect to renovations. We talk in terms of taking a house down to studs, meaning removing the drywall or plaster and on the interior dividing walls to gain access and move walls around. In Mr. Tronis's house, the studs had been removed. There were no interior dividing walls at all. In my recollection, there was a partial floor between the first and second floor. There was a little bit of framing, I think, that you could maybe stand on, but you had to use a ladder to get to it, if I remember correctly. Basically, the house was a large, almost like a shoebox, a 2-story shoebox, and the alarming part was that not just that the interior dividing walls and supports were removed, but the exterior walls, which are framed. It's a 1920 something house, I think. The exterior framing on the house was largely destroyed by wood destroying organisms. So it was basically being held up by 2 layers of plaster that had been at some point subsequently applied to the framing on the outside of the house and had created sort of a concrete shell.
Ory would get the green light to feature the house in the next season of the reality show. Filming was set to begin in early May, but Ori would tell David that he had to meet with both he and his wife Shanti to make sure that they were both all in on the filming. He would finally get the couple together a week before her murder, and he would recall that she seemed really pissed off at David.
I arrived at the house to meet Dave and Shanti. Dave was by the pool, which is where I usually found him. It was a nice setting. And we spoke, and Shanti was not there. And I said, we really need Shanti to come down. And I didn't know where she was. We really needed to have Shanti here. That was the point of the meeting. And he hedged a little bit. And I said, it's really quite important. So he went to the garage, and I either yelled up the stairs or I don't know. He disappeared behind the door and came back with Shanti. If I remember, she had a headset on, like a telephone headset type thing on. She was working. That was whatever job she did, I guess, required that. And she had come down, and she was, by my estimation, unhappy to be there. And it was in a sort of a tense state. We laid everything out. She said she was fully on board with the renovation, and then she left. And David explained that it was obvious that she was unhappy with something, and she was only there as long as she absolutely had to be, and then left.
Investigators believed that Shanti had had enough, that the prospect of going on a national TV reality show for a zombie home makeover, where most likely their dirty laundry would be aired, was the final straw, because Shanti was an extremely private person. That night, had she told David that she was done, as she was sitting on the edge of the bed removing her earring, that she wasn't going to participate in the show? And her refusal to do so had enraged him to the point that he bashed in her head and then strangled her to death? That's what prosecutors believed. And 4 months after Shanti was found dead, a grand jury would indict David Tronis on first-degree murder charges. He was arrested at his mother's house, where detectives conducted a search warrant.
During that search, was there any jewelry recovered?
Yes.
And what was recovered?
What we'd been looking for 127 days, her diamond ring. In a ring box in a suitcase in Mr. Tronis' bedroom at his mother's house.
David had been telling people that Shanti could have been a victim of a burglary, that in fact thousands of dollars had also been missing along with her ring. And as long as that ring was missing, his defense could argue it was a burglar that had murdered Shanti. Now that the ring had been found among his possessions, that would be a harder sell. David pleaded not guilty. However, while he was in jail awaiting trial, his cellmate would come forward with information, alleging that David had told him that he'd murdered his wife. According to CBS News, the informant would share with police that David had allegedly admitted to him that he and Shanti had a fight before she died. Apparently, she'd seen an app on his phone that had messages which would suggest that David was having sex with men, and that she was going to show everyone. David went on to tell his cellmate that he snapped, but he wouldn't say specifically what he did, only that he had killed his wife. Investigators were unable to corroborate the informant's alleged story about the app on David Tronis' phone or his alleged confession. In the meantime, the case continued to have extensive delays because David Tronis was not found competent to stand trial due to mental health issues. By the time he was found competent to stand trial, it was 5 years after Shanti's murder, and the trial began in October of 2023. Prosecutors wouldn't bring up David Tronis' alleged affairs in the trial as the motive for murder. They didn't have any evidence to support that Shanti had found out about the affairs and was leaving him. They believed David Tronis' motive for murder was because he had become obsessed with the house and believed that appearing on the reality show was the thing that was going to make all of his problems go away. That Shanti had refused to appear on the show, which upset David and led to arguments, and ultimately, her murder. In David Tronis' police interrogation, he would claim that he believed his wife possibly slipped and fell or blacked out before drowning in the bathtub. But prosecutors would say not only was there no sign of a drowning, but that there was blood everywhere and that her injuries pointed to her being beaten and strangled. In fact, the medical examiner would testify that Shanti had multiple injuries. Blood all over her face, bruising around her neck, petechia in her eyes from strangulation, and scrapes on her legs from being dragged. That she had been hit with such force that she had 2 skull fractures, and her hyoid bone in her throat had been broken, and that her ear was pulled to the point of it almost being torn off.
Were you able to come to a conclusion about the cause of her death?
I believe that the cause of her death is a combination of the strangulation and the blunt head trauma. Strangulation alone, I think, is sufficient to explain the death. She's obviously been strangled. And I think the blunt trauma to the head alone may be sufficient. So in this case, I can't say for certain. I know that both the head injury that we saw there, that she was alive for both that and for the strangulation.
Manner of death. Were you able to decide upon a manner of Shanti Cuvratronas's death?
Yes, in this case, the manner of death is homicide.
And why is that?
Because I don't believe that there's any way that this individual would have sustained those injuries as a result of accident. I don't believe that they're consistent with a self-inflicted injury. It's definitely not natural disease, and it is almost classic for strangulation.
Is this consistent with a fall into a bathtub, either striking her head or striking her neck or both somehow?
Well, certainly there could be some component of that, but it doesn't explain the extent and location and quality of those injuries.
After deliberating for almost 5 hours, the jury would find David Tronas guilty of first-degree murder. I want to end this episode with Shanti's son, Jackson, who showed up every day in court during the trial to be there for his mother. And at long last, during the sentencing phase of the trial, he was able to share his feelings about what he's lost.
Your Honor, my mom was the best person I ever knew. She worked a lot, but she never put her family over work.
Jackson, take your time.
Early 2018, she was taken from me and my family. It's like a hole in my heart that I can't fill or fix. She didn't die peacefully. She did not deserve anything that happened to her that night. My family and I have been waiting for about 5 years for justice. I miss her so much. I would have never thought the day before was the last time I would see my mother alive. I miss the times where we would go to Universal, or just the simple times, like walking the dogs or going to the park. She was the best mom I could ever ask for.
David Tronas was sentenced to life in prison. He maintains his innocence and is appealing his conviction. Up next, our bonus episode. Here, my co-host, Brandon Morgan, and I will discuss the case, including bits that didn't make it into the episode. And as always, thanks for listening. From Cloud 10, Criminal Mischief is a pie-in-the-sky production, recorded in the beautiful Pacific Northwest. We're produced by Brandon Morgan and myself, music by Soundstripe. I'm Carolyn Osorio, your writer and host.